Hey everyone, this is Will. Welcome to the As You May Thunk episode number 5. Uh, I'm here with Michael and Daniel, uh, and we're just gonna hang out and talk about a few things. We've decided to make at least kind of one format change, and that's to try to focus more on prototyping and playing with use cases and things like that, rather than doing implementation, with the idea of getting to the point where we can make like a fairly polished video or textual write-up or whatever, or both, describing what we'd like in a collaboration tool. Or other tools, like maybe multiple tools. So that's hopefully we'll do some of that today. Before I start that, before we start that, I guess what else? Everyone's sick, so I guess Michael's not going to drive this time. I'm sick a little bit, so I might blink my camera every once in a while to blow my nose. And Daniel's sick. I guess the most interesting thing that's happened from my perspective, as far as we may thunk, is that I just got back from England, and I spoke at the CodeMesh conference in London, and I also visited Cambridge, and I talked to a number of people about some of these ideas of collaboration, and a few of the people I talked to sort of shared this interest, and I had a lot of good conversations with them, so hopefully we can talk to them at some point. The other thing I did was I gave a talk on Minicannon, the logic programming system I've been working on with other people for the last 10 years plus. And originally it was going to be this grand vision of what logic programming could be like, or constraint logic programming could be like, and it kind of morphed for two reasons. Phil Wadler gave a very nice keynote talk the day before about types and Curry-Howard isomorphism and all these cool things, and that ties into Minicannon things. The other thing was that I had been talking to people about trying to do more interactive talks based on collaborative tools, and people were very encouraging and suggested that I try going for it and actually use my talk at CodeMesh to do that. So I did that. I had my CodeMesh talk be sort of my first experiment in using a mixture of tools for real audience participation in terms of coding. So I used David Kahn's Veneer editor for Minicannon. It's actually not just an editor, it's a client-side, web-based JavaScript compiler for Minicannon. Compiles Minicannon into JavaScript. The compiler is written in JavaScript, and it allows someone to run Minicannon code in their browser client-side. In fact, I'll bring it up. Let me screen share. I think I may have shown this already before in a previous Hangout and talked about it, but let me just bring it up again. Veneer. Yeah. So, screen share. Yeah, here's Veneer. And you can see, oh, that's interesting. So I guess I haven't closed Firefox maybe since my demo, or maybe there's something that remembers the state. But you could see that the font was a large size, and that actually was because when I was trying to give the demo, the projector was, the image being projected was fairly small, so you couldn't see the text very well. So what I tried doing was increasing the font size in Firefox, which had the unfortunate issue of meaning you couldn't see all the code horizontally. So it kind of gave me some idea of what issues with Veneer we might want to experiment with to try to make this work a little better in the future. But the idea is that I was typing code into Veneer and using things like the relational interpreter or the type inferencer, which so David has this code also built in, and so giving some of these examples, and also just typing in code, sort of live coding things, and clicking on the run button and getting answers here, and clicking on more answers and typing stuff at this read eval print loop, and so forth. So I was doing that instead of using Emacs and the REPL built, or REPL inside of Emacs is which I normally do. And using this, I was able to to give a talk and type code interactively like I normally would, and see if people had questions. The part that was different from how I usually give talks is that I gave, I wrote on the, in an Emacs buffer, I included the link to this editor URL, and I encouraged people to play along at home. So, in other words, people in the audience to get out their laptops and open up Veneer so they could run code on their own. And for things like the relational interpreter and the type inferencer, they could just run the same code I was, because I was just selecting from the existing code. But for live coding, I did the create file, so I had a new blank file, and that there I was doing things like showing how many Cameron worked, and then I'd click run, and you can see that x is equal to 5 and all that stuff. Okay, and when I was just typing in code, we ended up actually defining a real relation in mini Cameron, and there I wanted to share it with people, so I tried sort of what we've talked about a little bit before of taking the code and then sticking it into Git. Basically, I'd take this code, copy it into Emacs, save the file, check it into GitHub. I create a GitHub repo, and then people could do basically a clone on their end to get the repo, and then they could get the latest version or individual versions. And every time I would do a check-in, I would tell people sort of what check-in I was doing. So let me see if I can bring up the GitHub as well. So there's my GitHub. Yeah, okay, so here's the repo from my talk. And you can see at the top of my talk information, I actually had a URL to this GitHub repo, and then the URL for Veneer. And then yeah, so here's one of the things that we worked on. So this is so Phil was talking about lambda calculus, and he showed sort of the syntax for lambda calculus. So this is just a simple relation that can take a term, a lambda calculus term, and verify that it's well formed. But because it's in mini Cameron written as relation, it can also generate well-formed terms and that sort of thing. So this is a very simple example, but this is something that I checked in, and people were able to play with it at home. And what I really did to try to get more of the feeling of this is, I built this up in steps, and then I checked it in many different versions. So let's see, there's got to be some way to look at the history, right? How do you look at the history here? Do I look at, no, it's not the branches. Do I click on the file? Commits leftmost on the blue bar. The blue bar. What blue bar? Oh, right here? 13 commits. Okay. Thank you, Daniel. All right, so here are a bunch of commits, and you can see my messages. So this was intentional. I would just say I would just commit some code and I would say commit number 1. So let's see. So the first thing I did was just like, I guess, the blank file. Wow, this is all diffs. Is there a way to just like view the file? Ugh, I don't know how to use this at all. Anyway, I guess I'll have to figure out how to use GitHub to do this stuff. So what if I just want to see number 2? Whoa, I just clicked on number 2. Click there. No, click on 2. Oh, that's so awkward. Okay, anyway. Oh.
So Will?
Yeah.
So when it was jumping back to you, I think what you were doing was clicking on your own name.
Yeah, I think I did that.
So if you want to view, so go to a commit, and if you want to view the contents of the commit, so you're zoomed in a little bit much.
Okay.
Not a little bit so that we can see more UI. In the upper right, there's that view button.
Upper right, view button. Okay.
Yep. So that will show the whole file at that version.
Ah, okay.
Now I'm not sure if there's a convenient way to navigate between, a whole file for a fixed whole file at a bunch of different commits in the GitHub UI.
Okay. So this is the first commit, just unifying 5 with 5, right? And it was kind of awkward, right? So I was like trying to do little tiny commits, but part of the talk was obviously the introduction to Minicanron, and part of it was trying to play around with this, right? And I told the audience like up front that I was going to try to do this, so a number of people tried to play along. So here are the only changes. I changed the 5 to a 6, right? And then let's see. I was making like little baby changes, and every single time, of course, I had to like copy this from Veneer into Emacs, and then do a commit like from the command line. So here it changes the variable. So this was like really awkward doing it for micro commits. Obviously, this is kind of ridiculous doing commits at that level, but I wanted to just try it. So I would. I just gave numbers to each of the commits, and then I would just verbally say which commit it was so that someone could check it out. So, and here I goofed it, and I have 2 5s, for example, and I didn't know how to fix it. So 6, yeah. So here I'm starting to get like slightly bigger chunks of code, but it's still pretty small. And then let's see what it's like 9 look like. Okay, so 9's when we're starting to get kind of into some real code and doing little Minicanron relations, right? So it was pretty slow and awkward to do this, but it kind of captured the idea of what I wanted in some crude way. Yeah. So here's the latest. Oh yeah, you can see that. Wait, what's the difference? It looks like just. Oh, okay. Added this umbrella and number and add these recursive calls. That's it. Okay. Yeah. So this is like the last version, and the previous version didn't have these. The previous version is basically incorrect, and that was fine. So we tried that. It didn't give the right answers, and then we added these things. Okay. So there were 10 different commits, and the idea was that I was giving verbal cues as to which commit I was on. And the talk was recorded and will be online hopefully soon. So part of the idea was not just people in the audience, but people who watched the talk afterwards. They could say, okay, then go here and see commit number 7 and grab that and paste that into Veneer and see how it works and then play with it, right? So this was like a very, very crude version 0.0001 of what I would actually like. And so let's see, someone going into commit 9, they could go in here, they could grab this code. Actually, they probably have to click on raw, right? Okay, and I can grab that code, and then they can go to the Veneer editor, and they can paste that in, and they can click run, and it says yes, because that is an honest-to-goodness lambda expression, lambda calculus expression. And of course, sort of the more interesting thing is they can put a logic variable here, like Q, and now they can start generating lambda calc. Wait, is that right? Oh, this was the wrong. I got the wrong one. Wait. Oh yeah, so I need the commit number 10. Okay, that's actually good. So I grabbed the broken version, and sure enough, it's broken. So let me view the new version. Grab the raw. Okay, so let's try going back and changing it, and paste that in. Okay, so we've added these side conditions, and we've added these recursive calls. And if I do run, hopefully that resets stuff. Okay, cool. And now, so here's where I'd like history, but I don't know if you. Whoa. Yes, I don't think there's any history here in Veneer, like in the REPL or anything. But I guess I can go back up and try to copy this expression. Go down here and paste it. Yeah. So now I can generate unbounded number of legal lambda calculus expressions. Okay. So that was the basic idea of what I was doing in my talk. So using basically I had 4 elements, 4 moving parts, if you will. So I had Veneer as the editor and had people run Veneer on their laptops. And then I had the GitHub and Git and committing everything to each version to Git. And then I also had the fact that it was recorded and will be up on YouTube or whatever hosting they're using. And actually, they might be using a different service. I forget which video service they're using. And then the last part was sort of my giving oral timestamps that map into the commit numbers or the commit messages. So I would say I'm committing version 7, right? And then I would use that 7 as the commit number. So that's basically what I did. And then I could tell you kind of what I thought worked about it and what was kind of awkward about it. But I've talked too much already. So Michael and Daniel, do you all have any questions or comments? You had a couple things in chat. Maybe you want to say some of those things verbally or whatever.
I was just curious how long your talk was. It seemed like this would add a lot of overhead.
Well, it did because it's so awkward. My talk was 45 minutes, and at some point I was able to just use the existing code, right? So I could just select from here relational interpreter or type inference. But it's definitely slower, right? I mean, that talk was partly an introduction to Minicanran, but largely trying to explore this approach, right, and try to actually start doing it and get people to follow along. So there was definitely a trade-off there, and basically I just bit the bullet and I thought, well, these tools aren't really ideal yet, but if I just go ahead and start playing with it, I'll get a much better sense of what the strengths and limitations are than if I just guess. And this will also, starting to give talks this way will force me to improve the tools. So yeah, it definitely was slower than it was before. There were people who followed along. I don't know what percentage of the audience. I'd guess there were probably something like 30 people in the room. I'm not sure what the exact count was, and I'm not sure exactly how many people were following on the laptop, but there were a number. And some people came up afterwards and said they liked the talk. No one came up afterwards and said they didn't like the talk, but I guess they probably wouldn't. I'm going to mute you, Michael. Thanks. And so let's see. People said that they thought the approach got people involved, because I guess even the people who weren't following along and playing were were sitting next to people who were kind of playing along, I guess. So the people playing along, I guess, were invested and they were kind of like playing around with things. And I'd actually like to hear from someone who did play along. No one who played along talked to me afterwards, so I'm not exactly sure what their experience was. But yeah, so that's a good point, Michael. It definitely was slower, right? And I knew it would be slower. In fact, okay, so I sort of dodged a big bullet. Apparently, in that section where I was giving the talk, the previous speaker during their talk, the wireless internet stopped working. So had the wireless stopped working, that would have been unfortunate. It would have been a very short-lived experiment because I wouldn't have been able to run Veneer myself. So that I guess is one issue, is like if you don't have reliable internet, then that could be a problem. But fortunately, the internet wasn't a problem, or the wireless wasn't a problem, so that was okay. Let's see, from comments, Daniel says, it's comical how big the run button gets. Yeah, so this was like an issue, right? So let's just kind of talk about sort of what the experience was like for me trying to run this thing. So there are a couple things. So I hook it up to the projector, hook up my laptop to the projector, and the first thing I notice is, on that projector in that little room, the text kind of looked like that, right? It was like totally unreadable to people in the back, and the screen wasn't that big and so forth. The lights were on, so it was hard for people to see. So I tried increasing the font size, and I had to increase the font size to, let's see, I went full screen. The font size was something like this, I think. Okay, so you can see this font size. Now we have save file has moved down one. And I don't know if there's a way to change the font size of the code without changing the font size of like these kind of widgets up top. Maybe you don't want to. But yeah, as Daniel points out, this run button gets really, really big. It used to be kind of hanging off here on the side. But one of the things I was thinking is like, I would actually probably like the run button to like kind of go off to the side or up top or something. I mean, it's nice having a big run button you can easily click on. But if you do need to bump up the font size, then now the run button's getting in the way. So one of the reasons I put these comments up here was actually to make sure the code was like down below the run button. So I had to be very conscious of that. The other issue I ran into is that now the code's like starting to run off the screen to the right. In fact, I think I did bump it up another notch. And so what I ended up doing was I made my window even bigger, so it didn't actually fit on my screen, and I would just show part of the window. Like you don't really see it here with the screen sharing, but now part of the window is off of my laptop screen. I can't see it, so I made it. I made the window really, really wide so that I could see all the code on the left-hand side, because the code on the right-hand side, if that wraps, it's like not such a big deal. So there are some issues like that, and I actually was hoping to have something like the frames resizable, or so I could drag, like I could take that splitter in the middle of the window and like move it to the left or right. Apparently that's hard in JavaScript, or it's hard to do it well or works portably. I don't know. Be interesting to talk to David about this. So the run button was kind of in the way. I had to kind of, resizing the text was a little tricky. And I should point out, I mean, this is not a criticism of the work David did at all. I think Veneer is awesome. It's more like I'm kind of abusing it for something it wasn't really intended to be used for, because the tool is so awesome. So so the run button, that could be made smaller or something, and some of this probably isn't that hard to hack. What else was a little awkward? So another thing, I guess this is kind of Veneer specific. So by trying to use Veneer, basically I was using a tool that's specific to a specific programming language, right? And it makes sense since I'm talking about Minicameron, to have an editor for Minicameron. So I don't have any problem with that. one thing, and this has good and bad trade-offs, but one thing about Veneer is that the user interface for Veneer, for the what are called run expressions in Minicanron, uses a different syntax than in the books and papers and other versions of Minicanron. So there's not a run expression form. And I think I was able to work with that okay. I guess one of the issues could be that if I wanted to show code that was coming from a paper or something like that, I would have to kind of mess with the expressions because the interface is a little different. So it'd be cool if Veneer could handle those run expressions or have an alternative interface. And then, like I was saying before, if I want to go back to a previous value in the REPL, like I guess I have to scroll up and look for it. So they're just little things like that. And I guess bigger was like Michael pointed out, there was, I had to go through this whole thing of, okay, I wrote some code, run it, it works, select it, copy it, paste it in Emacs, save that file, and then, I don't know, maybe I can just, well anyway, I would save the file from Emacs, and then I would open, like in the terminal, I would do a commit and give it a message which is a number, and I would say the number out loud, and then I do a push, and then tell people to do a poll on their end, right? So all of that was time-consuming and awkward, and it was time-consuming enough where it didn't make sense to even try it really, unless the changes were big enough or written enough code. So that's something that would, I think, need to be really seamless. So, I was thinking, maybe, there could be a fork of Veneer or some other tool that's sort of similar to this, where it would also have some notion of talking to Get or some other version control tool, or maybe the GitHub, where just like kind of we've got this run button, I could also have like a check-in button or something like that. Or maybe the interface is like something where I have a slider or scrubber type thing where, someone who's following along can easily see what sort of commits I have, or the person driving has, and they can, kind of easily grab any version they want from that. In fact, you might even not need to go to something like GitHub, but it'd be nice to have something like Git. So making that much simpler to use and much more elegant and seamless to use, like the check-ins, the commit messages, the versioning, and grabbing it on the user side, and then having it like run or whatever, that would be probably the most important part, actually. That if that were seamless, then I probably would be able to go at almost full speed doing this. Certainly after I gave one or more talks like that, I'd be able to go much faster. So that's one thing that would be really cool, is to have some sort of like Git integration for both pushing and pulling. Obviously you would want to do that in some sort of way that would be not leaking people's SSH keys or something like that. But I don't know how easy it is to do. Okay, Daniel says IntelliJ has a presentation mode kind of for this purpose. Okay, so what does that do, Daniel?
It's mostly a font size thing, so increasing font size,
okay.
Removing a bunch of extraneous elements, basically mostly what you want, but not making like the UI and the Chrome so much bigger.
Yeah, okay, good point. So I guess the other thing I can imagine that would have been really helpful is, had I been able to do like an Emacs where I change from vertical split to horizontal split of the screen, where the answers would be along the bottom, or had I been able to make either frame take up all the screen and make the other frame temporarily hidden, those sorts of things would, I think, have made it easier. But yeah, something like a presentation mode or sharing mode would be cool. So yeah, so those are kind of my two big things. Making it easier to see the code, just sort of like UI, font size elements, that sort of thing. And then the other one, and maybe, potentially color. The color, it seemed to show up okay color-wise, so that really wasn't a problem. That projector didn't show red very well, so I don't know, the comments may have been a little hard to read, but everything else I think was fine. And then the other part would be some way where it's easy for someone following along to share, or to grab whichever version that I'm sharing and then be able to like run it instantly or something like that. So, or to go back to a previous commit or that sort of thing. So those would have been the features that I think would have made the talk go more smoothly from a technical standpoint and UI standpoint. What else could I imagine having? Well, I think we talked about this a little bit. Well, one thing I would really like to have would be the ability for someone who's playing along during the talk, who's actually running this in their browser during the talk, if they're getting confused or if they have an example they like, I would really love for them to be able to somehow share back with me while the presentation's going, share an example with me and maybe some text asking a question or something like that, or having some sort of chat, but having some code that they can send back, and have that be sort of something integrated and so that would be cool.
So do you feel like the most important element of that is an attention management or a reconciliation of like code differences?
In terms of having someone push something back, you mean, or ping?
Yeah.
I think the main thing, I think there are two things there. So one is, if someone is confused about something, I want to try to address that confusion as quickly as possible. Or if someone wants to know, sometimes people will ask questions, right? But if once they have this ability to start playing with the code, then instead of just asking a question, it might be easier, verbally. If their question involves like a more complicated query, it might be easier just for them to like kind of push that up. Or maybe they're a little shy and they want to do this anonymously. That was another thing I was talking to friend Andrea there about the importance of anonymity if someone wants to participate in the audience or remain anonymous about what they're doing. They might want to be able to anonymously submit a question and have that answered. So I think it's more about that sort of thing, than about code reconciliation. So, but I'm not sure. I guess it'd be partly a way to get people more actively involved and thinking about what's going on, to share cool examples, to ask questions immediately, and also then if I were giving a tutorial, let's say, then I could do something where we could have short little breaks, and people could have been pinging in or sending in like little questions or samples or things like that, and then I could stop and like look at what people sent me and then kind of like let's pick a couple examples and look at it, or let's pick a couple cool queries that people came up with. I can say, all right, here's this interpreter, or here's this type inferencer. Try to find some cool queries that generate interesting programs, and then send me your favorites, right? And then after a few minutes, I could stop and we could look at a few of these queries together or something like that, right? So I don't know how well that would work in practice, but I can imagine that sort of interaction as well. So that would be beyond the things I was trying to do in the talk, but that would be kind of a next step to try experimenting with. Yeah. So that's what I did, and when the video is online, I'll let people know about that, and they can watch it. I haven't, I'm curious to watch it myself, because whenever you're busy giving the talk, you're kind of in a different mental state than when you're watching the talk. So I have no idea If I watched it again, I might completely hate it or think it was a disaster, but I hope not, because I think just the fact that I was willing to screw up my courage and try it is fine. It's like, I think Code Mesh is pretty tolerant of people trying new things. So I see this as the first step towards hopefully way more interactive, more interesting talks, and hopefully we'll have a big influence, at least, or at least make my talks much better in the future. But obviously the tools are pretty crude right now. Need to improve those, but I think it wouldn't take that much more work to make it semi-usable, at least. You have any thoughts, Michael? Or Daniel, either one of you?
I mean, I'd be curious to see the video when it comes out and just see roughly how long you actually had to spend clicking around, and just how much of your time was consumed just in overhead and trying to maintain that.
It was enough that I wouldn't. I mean, if I had to do that every time, I wouldn't give the talk in that style. It was, I think okay for an experimental talk trying it out, but it was kind of frustrating. Now, obviously, I could get much better at it. But I guess that's another part of it. It's like I think if I were fast, if I had practiced it a few times, like I could be fast enough where it would be reasonable. But I was more worried about it on their side also, because if I'm giving this to a new audience who hasn't tried this before, they're going to have to, do a git clone. They're going to have to, be doing git pulls, and they're going to have to be, opening up in some other editor probably that file and then copying the code and pasting it into their Veneer session on top of the old code, right? And then clicking run, and now their REPL, I don't even know what sort of state the REPL is in when it does that. I should ask David or play around with it. Like, I don't know if the REPL resets. You still see the old history, but does that mean the state of the REPL gets reset, like all the definitions, or is there old code and new code living together? So there are all those sorts of things that makes it. I think even if I could do it super fast, I'm afraid that people following along would get lost during the talk. It's just like too much overhead for them. So I don't know exactly how long it would take, but if it takes 45 seconds for them to do that, then they're kind of out of, they're missing part of the talk then probably at that point. So I think it has to be made more seamless, I think is the deal. It has to be made more seamless for me and more seamless for them.
It seems like they definitely have a lot of steps that they have to do, because, every time you commit something, they don't have a commit ID that they can check out. I mean, I guess they could always just check out the master if they're following along live. But if it's not, they have to look through the log and find, well, what is commit 7, right?
Yeah, now, so for people who are following along and they just want the latest code, they should be able to just get the latest. But if they do want to go back to a previous version, or if they're following along on a YouTube video or whatever, right? Say the video is online and they're trying to follow along, then they actually have to look at the history and then figure out the commit, I guess like the hash or whatever for that particular version. Because can you grab it from just the message? Can you get a commit from the commit message? Or do you have to get the hash?
I don't know how to just find it from a message. Probably
yeah, so they probably have to do that extra step, right? Yeah, so I think the whole thing is sort of like Tiddlywiki, Michael's, right? It's like not that they couldn't do this, but it has to be made so seamless that it's like easy to do, and it's like, oh yeah, of course, no problem. Starting a new tiddler is like instant. So I'd want it to be seamless enough where it's like moving a slider or something like that, to get a new version. Where it's like, they can stay within Veneer or whatever tool they're using and not have to go outside to external tools. Ideally, they shouldn't even have to know that Git even exists or that they're using Git. They should be able to say, okay, I'm just doing different versions of this, and it should all be hidden. is what I'd hope.
Were your
So I
changes
guess
monotonic?
Sorry?
Were your changes monotonic?
What do you mean by that?
Well, did they always move in a direction of kind of adding more features or more functions, or did you ever remove anything or break something you'd already written?
I definitely broke some stuff, but not in an interesting way. So in the beginning, when I was just trying, it was like in the beginning I was just trying to get us like all on the same page to see if it even worked. So I was committing things like equal 5 5, right? That would be a program, and then equal 5 6, that would be a program, and I would commit that separately, right? And that was just because I'd never done this before and I wasn't sure how it would work and the audience and all that. So I did several of those before I got any more confidence, but I didn't really do a whole lot with the bigger ones. There's certainly nothing that would break it, but in theory it could, right? Might want to do that. What's your thinking about that?
Well, I was just thinking, like, what if if someone ended up pulling like the very latest version of the code that you'd committed, and then was trying to follow along with the REPL interactions?
Yeah.
Would that be broken for them? And potentially, it sounds like.
Okay, I guess I'm not. I'm still not getting it. Are you asking if any of my commits were actually broken?
No, if someone followed along your whole talk, but using the definitions from the very end of the talk.
Oh, okay. So say someone's watching a video later after the talk.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? And they stop. Yeah, Yeah. So what I would really want it to, I would want. So they might not even have those definitions. Like at the last version of the commit might not even have those definitions that were like halfway through or something. Yeah. So this also was another issue that came up, right? Some people were like, well, maybe what you really want to do is something like an IPython notebook where you're doing every single evaluation and things like that, and you have like a record of everything. And in some sense, I think that's quite nice. I think I don't know. When I started thinking about it more, I think that has some issues, though. I think that misses some of the interactivity, playing along stuff, or maybe there just needs to be another notion of an IPython notebook.
So what issues do you see?
Well, maybe I haven't used IPython notebooks enough. So there's an evaluation session, or part. There's like kind of a REPL-y thing, and then there's like changing definitions themselves. So say I change the definition for one of my functions, right? How does that work in the IPython world?
Well, so I think Python works kind of the same way as a scheme top level works. Everything is basically going through a REPL. So it's really, if you have a definition, it's just like loading a define into a REPL.
Yeah, so I guess the Veneer stuff is more like I have an entire file, right? And I'm evaluating that, and then maybe I'm typing some expressions at the REPL, but I don't know. It's just a different interface. I guess the other part is, what I really want is for people to be able to follow along later with the video. I guess they could do that with timestamps or whatever. But I also, it's important. I really want to explore this idea of people being able to push back things. Like they're playing with, they've got something they want me to look at. And maybe you could build that on the notebook model. I don't know. It's definitely something different than kind of I had in mind. It'd be interesting to try both and kind of see how it works. I guess in some sense the notebook is similar to if I give a talk at the REPL, if I'm using the Emacs REPL and say I give like an hour-long talk, and I'm just like loading things and changing definitions and all that, then I'll usually save the buffer for the Emacs session and then like commit that to GitHub or something for people to look at. That's not very structured. It's hard to tell what definitions are in scope at any given time, but maybe the notebook stuff helps that. And I guess you could be able to run it also. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe sort of like an IPython notebook mode for Veneer would be interesting to try to see what that would look like. Um, I don't know about the going back and forth part. I don't know if how that would work, but maybe it'd be fine. I guess I
Yeah,
think REPL more in some sense, but
yeah. I don't think it has anything that would, support pushing stuff back to you. And I think that you're right that it could be potentially tricky to figure out kind of what definition is live at a given moment if you didn't follow along from the very start.
yeah. So I guess part of what I'm thinking of is at any given point you can get to a safe state where you have all of the code, everything runs, it's all consistent. You don't have to guess what's in scope, and it's like every time I look at something like an Emacs REPL session or an IPython notebook session, it's sort of like, okay, at this given point in time, what is every single definition in scope and what has been redefined and all that, right? So maybe that's kind of a user interface problem. Maybe there's actually a way to kind of collect that information semantically and try to create like a file. Like if you took an IPython notebook and you say at this point in time, show me all of the definitions. What's the minimum set of definitions that would run this example? And put that in its own file, right? Maybe you could do that. But I'm not sure. I mean, obviously I haven't played around with it enough to know which approach is better. But
Yeah, I mean, if you're willing to have kind of a language level integration with static analysis to figure that out, then sure. I mean, very simple static analysis, but you have to
yeah.
have some.
And I imagine there are all sorts of other ways you could do this also. I was just trying to figure out with the tools I had, kind of what in my usual workflow style, like what would seem to kind of work. But I could see a notebook approach working also. So I guess the other part of the integration would be it would be really cool. When I talked about this idea of a slider or some other interface thing where you could grab whatever code is kind of being worked on at that point. If you're watching a video, it'd be really awesome to have some way. It's like, okay, we're at 23 minutes 14 seconds. Sync that to the code in Veneer or something like that for this particular talk or repo or whatever, and have it instantly go to the right code. So that, or even better, if you had like some sort of real-time mode, or I don't know, or you could actually like sync it to the video. I don't know if things like YouTube give you an easy way to like extract the current time from the video in like an asynchronous way, or in a way where it can like push the time to or you can use an API to like interrogate what the time is or something. I don't know if there's some way to do it, but it'd be cool if when you're starting and stopping the video or rewinding or whatever, if your say Veneer slider could kind of like keep track of what's going on and show you what the current code is at that point. So you can stop it anywhere, jump anywhere, rewind anywhere, and you're always going to have Veneer in a state where you could just run whatever you want and it'd be in sync. Daniel said, theoretically you could, with the YouTube embedded API, HTML5 video gives you that kind of data control. I guess it's like a video tag. Is that what that is? Yeah, so something like that. I don't know. You'd have to probably play around with it to understand in practice how well it works. But yeah, so that's what I'm thinking of. And I would like to give another talk soon, even if it's just like an informal talk, even if it's just like a hangout, right? That actually might be a reasonable way to do it. We could experiment with that. Do a hangout if we can, like, I don't know, make the interface even a little bit easier to use, or streamline the process, or try it with a notebook. I don't know, something like an IPython notebook, to kind of go through a little tutorial again and try to work out the mechanics better and try to figure out what can be streamlined, and how it might work better in practice. So I guess one higher level interface question is, does the notebook approach work better, or for what does that work better? For what does kind of having all the code that's in play at the given time works better? I'm not sure.
Notebook works nicely. It's kind of like a written essay style. So if you're writing something up and carefully thinking about how kind of everything flows and develops from a writing perspective,
yeah,
then I think the notebook works pretty well.
Yeah, and I think for talks that are more static, where you plan it out and you're not really like responding a whole lot to audience questions or improving based on where things are going or whatever, then that probably works well. And I can see that guiding your talk as well. The style I like to give is more fluid, I guess, where someone might want to ask about something. It's like, oh, okay, well, let me show you this thing that I haven't even mentioned. Like, you want to know about nominal logic programming? Okay, here it is. For something like that, I don't know. Well, maybe it could be made to work. Probably there are ways to give talks that you could make it work to some extent with any of these techniques. But I guess another question is, what else is there out there? So other than IPython notebooks, that sort of thing, or Jupyter or whatever, what other approaches or styles could be used to give these sorts of talks? So it's kind of what I was doing with Veneer, with the check-ins and checkouts, where you have like all the code at once. There's the IPython approach. Are there other approaches? I don't know. So that would be something to think about. But I think for the just my own personal presentation style, the iNotebook stuff doesn't feel quite right for me. But maybe it means I just have to play with it more, and I'm sure I could find a style that works, but it doesn't kind of grab me right now. Yeah, so I guess here's a technical question. How hard would it be to have some sort of web page integration into like a GitHub repo or some other? Maybe it's not even a Git repo. Maybe it's something different. But if you wanted to be able to like scrub back and forth between different versions of code and grab that, as someone who's in the audience, how hard would that be, or how easy could that be made, or how seamless could it be made? Like, could you actually do so one thing I thought, well, for GitHub, you need like the private keys and all that if you're going to do full SSH and then be able to push and all this, but there are also modes supported by GitHub and I guess Git where you're just doing HTTP or even grabbing a zip file or something like that. All right. So Daniel says Git supports HTTP, HTTPS, pulls without authentication. Yes. So say you're willing to have like a temp directory or something like that, right? Could it be possible to like save this to a temp directory and like as you're sliding it, it's just like, or maybe it pre-caches it if say you're watching a video of the talk. The first thing you do is like kind of pre-cache it, gets all the versions, and then you can like quickly scrub back and forth. I don't know. Well, a Git repo has all the versions in it. Okay, so if you just get it once, say with HTTP, then you could easily just go through. So would it be hard to, or how hard would it be, I guess, to add that functionality to grab a different version, like Git in the browser?
So let's just kind of put bounds on this.
Okay.
Does it have to interact with an execution environment like Veneer, or is it a completely separate application where you might copy and paste code between?
Ideally, it would be something like Veneer. I mean, maybe it's a standalone app, but probably you'd want it web-based, I guess. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I'm assuming web-based. But the question is, does it have to integrate with the same tool you use to run the code, or can it just be a separate web app?
Ideally, or at least Maybe make a distinction between what you use to run the code, but certainly what you'd use to edit and see the code for sure. Otherwise, it's kind of, you know, I don't want people to have to be doing copying and pasting and all that stuff, right? So ideally, whatever they're using to see the code, edit the code, ideally to run the code, would be the same thing where they're grabbing the versions. It would be the same tool.
Okay. So, I mean, that's really where the complexity comes in, right? Is integrating with these other tools and getting the UI to work with the kind of different concepts needed for the different aspects of the tools.
Yeah, so let's just tackle that one thing. Let's just say, forget all the UI elements, forget about pinging someone with like a question or something like that. Like, say we only wanted to somehow let people grab from Veneer, let's say, you know, easily grab versions of code that have been pushed from someone else and, you know, have that be the code that's displayed and executed when they click the, or, you know, like basically if you look in the Veneer window, right, let's show that again. So the left-hand side of this editor window here, right, so this code right here. So basically, Veneer already knows how to execute this code, whatever's in this window apparently, because I can type stuff in and it'll be right. So somehow we have some way, and maybe it's even external to Veneer. Maybe Veneer doesn't know this exists, but want some way that's basically as seamless as possible to the user to replace this code with code from a website or code from Git or GitHub or whatever that was pushed another time. Ideally, it'd be in Veneer, I guess, and they'd have a slider or a list of versions, or they could type in a version or something. But it would replace this code, or at least part of this code. So, you know, what would be involved in doing that? You know, so let's go for the gold. Let's say we want it all working in Veneer. We want a slider, and we want integration to Git. Say without using authentication, just like HTTP. That should be fine. Well, maybe it's not fine. Maybe it's not secure enough. But
well, part of the problem that you have to deal with is that your browser needs to know how to speak Git. If you want to interact with GitHub, at least.
Yeah. So, all right. Here's another possibility. Another possibility is like some of it is done beforehand. Like, okay, say at the beginning of the talk or at the beginning of the YouTube, or when someone's watching a video or whatever, they have to run some command line commands. So they have to do a git clone. And they can run HTTPS or whatever, and they have to set up the repo locally. But then at that point, you know, Veneer or whatever can take over.
That kind of makes the problem harder
because now you have, like, you're living in two worlds.
Well, yeah, now you've got a combination between kind of the web-based stuff and local stuff, right? Yeah. It's kind of easier to keep it entirely in one realm or another.
Okay, well, what about all these compilers that compiled, you know, executables to JavaScript and so forth? Is it possible to take Get and or is there like JavaScript versions of Get commands or anything like that?
Well, I mean, it seems like it's either it should be possible to talk Git, or there should probably be an API for like GitHub that we could use as well.
Mm. Okay, so maybe we don't have a Get tool, but we can talk to GitHub through JavaScript or HTML5 or something. All right, so Daniel's yeah. Well, a Git repo has over. Okay, so HTTPS GitHub.com creationx.js Git. Okay, let's see what this is. Oh, cool. I'll screen share that. Okay, so Daniel points to JS Git, a JavaScript implementation of Git.
I was sure someone had done it.
Yeah, it's like that can't not exist, right?
But the problem is if you read the very bottom of the document, they say you can't actually pull from GitHub from it because of cross-origin XHR limitations.
Okay. Is there some repo that you could grab from? Or like if I hosted my own server, would it work?
I mean, in principle, if you set up the appropriate CORS headers on something hosting Git, it should work. But I don't know. I don't know how hard that would be to set up.
How do CORS headers work?
Could you repeat that, Michael?
How do CORS headers work?
They basically allow you to specify in the browser response headers what origins are allowed to do cross-origin XML HTTP requests. And so this lets you basically do JavaScript-initiated fetches of resources across the ordinary browser security domain restrictions. But it's sort of
you're allowed to access GitHub, basically.
Yeah, so basically it's something that has to be done on the server side. So GitHub would have to change the appropriate headers on their system so that you could access their data from JavaScript. So there's some security implications. So I doubt Git would ever do it, but
Oh, so it has to happen on Git side. It doesn't happen as you serving the page.
correct. It has to happen on the resource side. So this is basically to prevent you from writing a JavaScript application that scrapes off sort of unauthentic resources in an unauthenticated way from some other site. So I mean, the only the classical exemption to the JavaScript cross-origin restrictions are things like image tags. But whenever you load an image tag cross-origin, you actually have fewer capabilities of working with that image than you would if it was a local resource. So you can't get a canvas image to read bitmap contents out of it like you can with a local one. And this just the same sort of philosophy was applied to JavaScript XHR. So you can't just load arbitrary resources from JavaScript because that could just be a total mess.
Okay, so say I'm willing to run my own server.
Well, one hack around this, right? If we're willing to run a little service that just proxied requests to GitHub.
Okay, so we could have an intermediary that would take care of that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could do that too. So you have basically a proxy service that inserts the appropriate CORS headers and just forwards to GitHub. That could work too.
Or just makes it appear at essentially the same origin as where we're hosting this page.
Okay, so say we did that, or one of those approaches, right? So somehow, I've got some sort of Git repo somewhere, either GitHub or with this proxy or my own server directly, and I set up the CORS headers or whatever. So then could we use this library to allow something like Veneer to do the Git commands sort of automatically?
Theoretically, yes, you should be able to expose a timeline out of the data that you could extract with this library.
No question there, right?
Was that?
Isn't there a problem? Well, Git history isn't necessarily linear, is it?
Oh, you mean like the scrubber might not work as a UI interface, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, in your case, it's probably is linear, but just...
Well, maybe they just type in a string for the commit message and it finds that or something. I don't know. So,
I mean, I like the slider. It's just, it's not necessarily reliable in all scenarios.
Sure. So that's an interface issue. But let's say right now it's linear, right? We'll keep it linear. Okay, so one question I guess is with this JS Git, if you want to get get a repo, where does that repo live? Is it like is this like a browser local cache? Is that where the files are?
By default, it'll probably be represented just as objects in browser memory, unless this library does something underneath for storing it in web local store, things like that. Okay,
so it wouldn't necessarily be persistent, like if you close your browser, restart it, or clear the cache or whatever, like it would go away. Is that right?
Most likely, yeah.
Okay. That's not necessarily a problem, I think, for this use. Okay, cool. And I don't know about this, like, okay, so if I create a file here, how do you create a file? I think I noticed something with this too. Maybe, I don't know if there's a Firefox thing. It's like I was able to create a file once, and then I didn't seem to be able to create a file again. Maybe I was doing something wrong. Oh, it's because I've already created a file. That's why. So like none of these things. Okay. So it's trying to keep me from clobbering my code, which is good. So if I save a file, whoa, well, let me save a file. Yeah, I get confused about this. Like I don't know if the interface is like in a weird state right now, or if I did something wrong, or what. So will Veneer save a file to like disk, or is that saying that's a no-no for JavaScript stuff? I thought, Michael, you told me JavaScript couldn't do that. Is that right?
There's a file API that can offer you basically downloads and allow you to select files from disk. And I think there might be like a, well, I mean, it could save it in local storage. I'm not sure if there's anywhere else. I mean, it can't, just directly write to some random place on your file system.
Okay.
File APIs, last I checked, are still sort of in flux as people try to figure out the happy medium between what applications want to do and what can be reasonably contained.
I see. So there's just like a general problem of doing something on the web. Okay. Well, I think for a talk where you're trying to get people to just like experiment with things and play around with things, that maybe that's okay. Or I guess the other thing is like, I guess people could save it to a server or a service or something like that. I mean, I guess if you have this GitHub API thing, you could also have people save to some other GitHub or a repo or to your server or whatever, so that maybe they don't have to have it local, or at least they won't lose it when they close the browser. I don't know. There's got to be some way to solve that problem.
You can certainly save it, between page loads, just with the HTML5 local storage kind of thing.
Okay. So if they restarted their browser, it would still be there?
Yeah, as long as they're not using incognito mode or something.
Okay. All right. That's probably fine then. Yeah. So
all right. So what about pushing back? Is that part of this design?
you mean having someone share like an example or something?
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely something I'd like. I think the repo stuff, or being able to grab versions, in some sense, I think that has to work well for the other stuff to be plausible, maybe. Like you've got to. So the sending stuff back and the pinging or sharing an example, sharing the question, all that stuff, I think in some sense is based on the idea that the people can run whatever code you have right then easily and grab it easily. And if they can't do that, then it's not going to be very useful, I think. Of course, there is another way of doing this, which is like really sharing the code directly, not going through something like Git, right? Making much more real-time collaborative stuff, which is, I think, some of the things we were trying to prototype before. This is going through intermediary. You've got all the revisions there. I guess it's a trade-off, but for watching a video, I guess this is better. For something that's going to be around for a while, I think this is better, because then I don't know what real-time collaborative editing means when you're going back and watching a video a year later. So yeah, I think the main priority would be maybe trying to fix the worst of the UI issues that I ran into. Although I could probably work around all of those, honestly. I think the main thing would be getting this Git stuff. So it'd be easy for me to check things in, and it'd be easy for people to get it, and they could do it very quickly, and I could do it very quickly. And I think everything else I could kind of work around. And the UI stuff, I think, probably there are at least hackish fixes that wouldn't be too hard to do. That would get 80% of where I'd want to be. So yeah, so I guess that's the real question, is like, how hard would it be to get this Git integration going? with this JS library or any other technology. But it sounds like it's at least possible to do.
Well, it looks like the read side of it is definitely probably not too bad. So
yeah, and it may also be possible that I could just get much faster at entering things. Like, if I'm just incrementing by numbers, and I'm like, it's like bam, check in 2 or whatever. And probably I'm not going to check in like every 10 seconds or something. I was being a little ridiculous during part of that talk, partly just trying it out and trying to imagine sort of what it would work like in real. But probably more like every couple minutes I'm going to do a commit. Is probably going to be a little more like it. I don't know. I guess part of it just depends on how awkward it is. If it's really fast, maybe I would do a commit every minute or 30 seconds or something, depending on what I do. I'm not sure.
So, sorry. So I put a second link into the chat. So it looks like the guy who wrote the JS Git also has a JS GitHub, which is using the GitHub data API instead of the ordinary Git protocol over HTTP. And apparently this is something you can just use from a browser without needing to do anything too crazy, like proxying cores. And it seems to also support adding a GitHub authentication token for writing. So theoretically, you could do committing as well as polling. Though he has a note here that access token is not required to read public repositories, but you'll be rate limited to a very small number of requests per hour. So maybe that would be okay for a talk for people who just want to get started. And you might even be able to do like a connect through GitHub authentication flow, so they could actually authenticate as themselves if they have a GitHub account. I don't know.
Okay, so can you talk about this access token thing? I'm not sure I understand this.
So most web services have methods for authenticating API requests. So I think in GitHub's case, it's just a token that you include as part of your API calls.
Okay.
And you can get that as sort of by going into your GitHub account settings and creating a new token for API usages. And there's also a way to generate them through a sort of interactive flow through OAuth.
Okay, so without that, you'd be rate limited to a small request per hour. Now, would that be for people pulling or for people sending or committing or both?
So you wouldn't be able to commit without an authentication token anyway. So it has to be, you have to have a token to push.
Okay, so if someone was following along though, would that mean that they could only get like 3 or 4 pulls an hour or something?
Well, I don't know what very small actually is defined as, so maybe it would be enough for an hour talk. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, the trick is that if you're doing a talk in a big conference hall, everyone probably has the same public IP, and it's based on IP, and it's 60 requests per hour, so you could burn that up with everyone just doing the initial checkout.
Yeah, that's probably not going to be enough. Okay, so... All right, so I guess the question would be, is there a way to...
So basically, the alternative is we just have to make people log into GitHub first, and say, hey, this app is allowed to interact with GitHub as you.
Ah, okay. So maybe people aren't going to be willing to do that. Would it then be allowed to do anything they could do? Could like delete all their repos or whatever.
I think you can restrict the scope of an API token to only be able to do certain things. So you could probably create a token just for reading a repository.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess the alternative is if you don't want to do that, then the first idea of having a CORS-enabled proxy to GitHub would probably work for you as well.
Okay.
Having to actually run that server is kind of a pain, though. It'd be really nice if we could dodge that. But
well, I could also run it on the local laptop in theory, too.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess what I'd want to do to begin with, at least, is give the best experience to the people following along and make it so that I can go quickly and smoothly. So if that, although I guess the problem of having extra servers is it's like one more thing that could fail, I guess, right? I guess another part Yes,
And
sir,
if
Jim.
someone's following along a year later, are you still, or 5 years later, are
Hmm.
you still going to be running the server? Whereas
That's a
if
good
you're
point.
just posting a static site of the Veneer install and some GitHub repo that you still have from 5 years ago, then people will still be able to follow it.
Hmm.
I think there's something fairly magical about kind of having applications with no server-side component, which is pretty doable in this case if you make people authenticate with GitHub.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I imagine there's going to be squeamishness for people about having this app authenticate GitHub. I wouldn't do that probably if I were an audience of a talk. Um, well, okay, I guess, are there any other things like GitHub, like Bitbucket or GitLab or something like that, that um, have somewhat different policies, or they already have their cores things set up differently? I don't know.
Near as I can tell, GitLab does not expose cores.
Okay. Well, I guess I have to think about it a little more. I guess if I had to choose right this second, right now I would probably pick the first option, even if that meant running the server. Because not everyone necessarily even has a GitHub account. But then there's this issue of the server has to keep up and running, right? And that sucks. So I guess for experimenting with this approach, I like the first solution better, but it could mean that it just stops working at some point, and so people wouldn't be able to go back and watch the videos. But it also would, I mean, I guess the good thing means is that someone doesn't actually have to know about GitHub in order for this to work, and they don't have to have a GitHub account. They don't have to sign into it. They don't have to trust the application to do the right thing.
I mean, I think the other thing is there's kind of different requirements for the real time while you're at a conference on the same IP address as everyone else versus someone going to look at the video like a year down the line.
That's a good point. So maybe there's two different modes or whatever.
Right. So in that particular case, if you have multiple methods of operation, so if you have a GitHub account signed in through GitHub, theoretically, or you use a local server for the duration of the conference talk, but then someone going back and looking at the presentation a year later is probably not going to be on the same network as a bunch of other people trying to get to the same repo at the same time. And so would probably not be subject to the same limits. And at that point, they really only need to get one pull, which is the latest.
Well, I guess one possibility would be, we really make a strong separation between kind of the real-time mode and the coming back later mode. And for the real-time mode, it's not even necessary, what's really important there, that it be really fast and seamless. And maybe Git isn't even the right solution.
Yeah, I guess my next question is, what is using Git as the backend actually buying us in this case?
A lot of pain, giant pain in the ass. What else? I mean, basically, we're just like taking snapshots of files and things like that, right? It's like,
yeah.
You don't have to have Git to do that.
And we're talking about something with a totally linear history.
Yeah.
With a slider, right?
Yep. So maybe we don't need that at all. So what would be
any important reasons for us to use Git, or?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Git. Git. I use Git just because it's like the only way I can think of to easily communicate with these folks, right? But I'd be perfectly happy to not use Git. I guess the thing is, what I would like is for people after the fact, if they're going back through a video, to be able to somehow, get things at different times, right? But that doesn't have to involve Git either. So maybe it involves some file which is specific to the special tool, which is like a Veneer-like thing, and you just load that file, and that file like populates it, and you can move the slider back and forth and whatever. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy. I'm
imagining just a single file or a set of files hosted on some static site hosting like S3 where you can turn cores on, but
do you even need that?
Well, I mean, so if this is supporting the live use case, right? You want their client, their copy of Veneer pulled up in their browser, to be able to pull somewhere and pull new versions.
So somewhere this file has to live, right? Or these files have to live.
Yep.
Can it all be client to client? Do you actually need a server at all to do that?
You want a server.
You want a server, okay. What happened to the magic of software without a server?
Our networks aren't set up to make that work.
They're not that much magic.
Maybe if we get a full rollout of IPv6 someday,
okay.
Maybe it'll happen. I don't know. But right now,
so maybe what we really want is like a simple protocol and a way to like just send copies of the text up to some server and be able to grab it or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine with me.
Well, and so one thing that again I'm going to advocate is for something that doesn't require any server-side logic really, that just requires hosting a file on the server side.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's again something that's more likely to still work a year from now. If you have to run some daemon written in scheme or something all the time on your personal server to keep this up and running, you probably won't do it. You won't fix it, right? But you can just upload a file onto some server you control that just serves it by HTTP, and you never have to touch it again, and as long as it keeps getting served by HTTP, you're good. Then that'll probably be pretty stable.
Upload it to Internet Archive. I don't know, whatever. Yeah, that'd be cool. So, and I would like to not commit to any commercial service. I mean, I don't really want to commit to GitHub either.
Sure.
I want it to be kind of agnostic, or where you could potentially like switch services or whatever. I mean, I don't mind putting something on GitHub or putting on Dropbox or whatever, but don't want to make that a requirement. Be happy to actually put things on the Internet Archive or some random server temporarily, or I don't know.
Yeah, so the only tricky constraint here is the cross-origin resource sharing constraint. So either the web app, the copy of Veneer that's being used, has to be hosted at the same domain as this file, or this file has to be hosted somewhere that is serving it with the right headers, so that it can be read from elsewhere.
And that's to prevent cross-site scripting attacks? Is that why that exists?
I suspect Daniel can explain better than I, but I think so.
Why do you need this core stuff, Daniel?
It's not exactly cross-site scripting. It's more of making sure that you can't grab the contents of arbitrary resources from sites across the ordinary browser security boundaries. So the reason that browsers are set up this way is so that you can't like arbitrarily interact with one application on another site with the user's sort of credentials and capabilities. So it's more of a cross-site request forgery protection than it is a cross-site scripting thing.
Okay. Cool.
So basically, if you were logged into your Gmail, Will,
Yeah.
and then you loaded up my Veneer thing, and I started making requests to Gmail through JavaScript, right? You wouldn't want that to work in a way such that, you know, it allowed me to read your email because you happen to be logged into Gmail in that browser.
Or send email or change your passwords.
Whatever.
What's the difference between that and a cross-site scripting attack?
So cross-site scripting is when there's inadvertent inclusion of attacker-controlled data into the page code. That's usually
if I load a .js file from the wrong website or something.
Yeah, so that's basically like someone sends you a link, for example, to log into Gmail, and that link has been doctored such that the page will load this hostile JavaScript file from a different domain and then run in the context.
Okay.
So CORS basically, unless the site is CORS enabled, you can initiate requests to cross origin using things like script SRC tags or image SRC tags, but you have no ability to read the contents that the server returns to you. So it's rather easy to prevent from the site side, prevent you from doing anything too hostile with that.
Okay.
But if you could read the contents, then you'd be able to sort of work around those defenses.
Okay, so we need to be able to put these files somewhere, some server or whatever, and that's a good point. So there is a difference between doing the interactive talk or tutorial or whatever, and the needs for someone watching a video of this thing afterwards. And I could even imagine, you know, if we took a bunch of snapshots somehow, that if we want it to be around later, we could even like automatically turn that into, you know, Git repo with individual commits or something like that. You know, if we wanted to do it on Git.
I mean, I think the most simple variant of this thing is basically having a really dumb server that you can, as the presenter, put files on, and that can be automated, and have it set the appropriate CORS header for anyone who wants to download it.
Okay. And it wouldn't require any logic running on the server?
It would require a little bit of logic. I mean, something to accept the files, but not a whole lot of logic. It would be like a
I mean, the simplest thing would be for Will on a personal server he controls and can SSH into, right? I mean, he just, you know.
Well, what about like Dropbox? Something like that.
I mean, basically, you'd be creating the most simple clone of Dropbox.
Yeah, I mean, you just need some place where you can write a script that can drop some files into.
Yeah, I mean, really, the main caveat is if you want people to be able to connect to it without having to do anything too special, like clicking a browser link is the most they need to do, then you need it to be someplace which serves it in a way that you can get at it with JavaScript. And so that usually means CORS. I mean, there's a couple of other ways that you could work around.
The other alternative is to host the client instance, you know, whatever app they're going to use, host that at the same place, right?
That's true. I mean, and the other thing is there are a couple of tricks that you can use to get around the ordinary browser security restrictions if you control the contents of the file that you're uploading. So, for example, there's the standard called JSON-P, which is basically, again, it was sort of designed to work around the limitations of cross-origin policies before CORS was sort of standardized. So in that particular case, you create a JavaScript file which basically just contains a single function invocation, which is your callback. And so in order to perform one of these API requests, you just add a new DOM element on your client side that is a script tag to this remote service or this remote file the client browser fetches it because it can do that cross-origin, and since it's JavaScript, it gets executed and it calls a callback that you can know about in advance and thus catch it in the client-side context. So in that particular case, it wouldn't matter where you stored your files as long as the user could download them. They would just have to be specially formatted on upload.
Okay, so it sounds like there are a couple technical solutions where people wouldn't actually have to know any of these details. It wouldn't, it could be all hidden from them in terms of how it works, and they can just, as far as they're concerned, they're just using some other web app, and it's got a slider element, and they can go back and forth.
Yeah.
So
I could imagine it being pretty easy to just have, a particular instance of Veneer or whatever application we're using that's kind of customized for that particular talk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when you load it, it just knows, well, here's where the files are for this talk. I'm hosted at the same server as the files that are relevant to the talk. And, yeah.
And what about after the talk is over? So what about the, say it's recorded on video and you want to go back and watch it later? So what would a reasonable story for that be? And Daniel, I think, rightfully pointed out that it's different at that point. You have all the versions already, right? You don't have to be real-time interactive. And so would you use a different version of Veneer? Would you use like the standard version of Veneer and then just, this file happens to be, like in the, say it's a YouTube video and happens to have a link to this special file or this URL. I guess you could even have a pre-set up. Oh, okay, so you could do this. You could like have a special version of Veneer that's integrated for just that file. It's like been compiled for that file. So it already has kind of like the scrubber built in.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they don't even need to grab a separate file. Just like that's it.
Yeah.
So you have a special version of Veneer that knows how to grab a file and then kind of reconfigure itself. Yeah. All right. I can imagine something like that. Yeah, so I guess of the two things, I'm more interested right now of playing around with the interactive talk part than with the YouTube coming back later and playing with it. They are somewhat different issues, but I mean, I'd eventually like to be able to get both working, but right now, I like to play around with increasing interactivity. So, maybe there isn't a story for coming back and watching the video later. Some talks and tutorials I give, they aren't even recorded. So,
I think it's easy to design around that issue. If you can do it live, you can do it delayed. I mean, yeah, I don't think it's that hard. It motivates you to, maybe try and not have to have a server running, or at least as much of custom server-side software.
Yeah.
That you're more likely to have it maintained. But other than that, it doesn't really complicate it too much.
Yeah. I mean, I have my own domain and servers anyway, so as long as it's not too much of a pain, I guess I could do some of that stuff anyway. Not so bad. Okay, so what would be kind of a minimum viable thing? I guess I also don't know, how much this would involve changes to things like Veneer, how hard that would be to do. So, okay, so I think what we came up with is GitHub is neither necessary, neither Git nor GitHub nor are either necessary nor necessarily desirable for this. Is that right? They're kind of solving a different problem, which is not the problem we have for interactive talk.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, particularly if it's just push from you to other people and not other people back to you. Well,
I do want that at some point, but there, I think when it comes to pushing back, it's like it's not really a version control problem in the same way necessarily. Yeah, so I guess the other thing is giving a talk is somewhat different from, say, online collaboration or something like that with a group of people. Um, so when someone's pushing back, kind of what I want to know is, okay, so which version are they pushing back from? And just like they were able to grab a certain file. I don't know. I guess one thing is um, with this model where we got files being pushed up to some server. Can they push up a file also? Can the audience push up a file? Is that a security problem? When they pull files, I guess I probably want to have a hash on that file or something like that. I don't know. I don't know.
Pushing with multiple clients means you need some more intellect on the server side to figure out who can push to what.
Okay, so if they can't push to the server, I guess there are things like just text chat. I mean, I could have IRC running. Anything like that's a little more awkward.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason I asked earlier on if the important part was reconciliation or if it was attention management for the collaboration aspects, because you could very much see, like, if you have a poll model, just generally speaking, where the audience participants can poll the current version of what you're doing or go on a timeline and see something you were doing in, like, the last minute. And if they have some way of bringing your attention to what they're currently working on, then you can very much follow the same poll model to look at what they're doing. And that way you don't need to spend too much time on the reconciliation problem. You can maybe see where they came from for context, but you don't necessarily need to sort of glom together their state and your current state.
Yeah, I think solving problems about merging states, that's not something I think I want to tackle right now. For online, for like multi-person real online collaboration, maybe that's more of an issue. But I'd be happy to even like open up a new browser window or something like that, or browser tab to grab their version. Probably would be fine. I mean, what I would like is to try to make it more interactive. So, I mean, this is trying to make it as interactive as possible. So, one part of it is they're being able to run what I'm doing and modify it on their end and play around with it. And then the other part is they're letting me know questions, code, and, cool queries or whatever. And then I should be able to run whatever they have. And it could be the same sort of model where it's like basically grabbing a file in a certain state. However, that's most easily done.
Yeah, I mean, I think my point is I don't necessarily think you want to wade into the problem of how to merge and reconcile differences, because that's
I don't care about that.
That's the whole like challenge of a version control system. So
yeah, I want to just sidestep that entirely. Assume that they just have the complete. They've got a bunch of source code, and I'm not gonna. I want to be able to run it. I don't want to be able to like diff it with what I have right now.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, that's the exact same interaction model that the people in an audience would have with the presenter anyway. It's the same thing. They want to be able to pull your state and experiment with their own copy of it, whatever that state may be, whether it be files or whatever. And I think the same thing applies then too. If someone wants to show you something, you basically probably want to have the same interaction model where you can look at what they're doing, you can fork off a copy of what they're doing, but you don't necessarily want to spend the time figuring out how to reconcile differences between arbitrary user sessions, because that's
right.
going to be a very ridiculously difficult problem.
That's correct. That's correct. So, in fact, even just figuring out. I don't want to be doing real-time merges when I'm giving a talk or something. It's like already my IQ drops by like 40 points when I'm giving a talk. There's like so much stuff going on, right? It's like so something where someone in the audience could do something approximating what I'm doing in terms of like essentially here's a file with everything, and if you just load this in Veneer and run it, it'll work, and in fact, Veneer will automatically run it if you slide it or whatever. I don't know, whatever model that is. Where I could do something similar, and I could, just run whatever state they're in, and there are things like text chat or whatever, but there's also verbal communication when you're giving a talk. So I'm less worried about that. I could open an IRC window or something like that. That's like a little awkward. So I'm happy to have verbal communication with someone. I just want to make sure that if they do have like a more significant working example, you can't communicate verbally all that code, right? And I don't want to have to go to GitHub. I don't want to have to go to a gist. I don't want to make them set up a gist. I don't want them to have to know what a gist is. So that would be fine. But I think the first part is just getting it to work so that they can grab whatever I have and kind of go back and forth. And if we can solve that, then I think
we need to keep both issues in mind because it leads to a different design, right?
Okay.
If it's only pushing from you to them, then kind of you don't need a server or you don't need an intelligent server. But I
want both, but they don't both have to happen at the same time. Like put it this way, right? It's like one feature has to come before the other, I think, and
sure.
Yeah. I mean, if it turns out that the model is such where it's like just as easy to do both at once, then fine, great. Yeah. So that would be cool. Okay. When's my next talk? Let me look at my calendar. So I guess part of it is like how much JavaScript UI surgery needs to be done to Veneer to hack all this in. Is this something where like we need to beg David to teach us Veneer internals, or?
I don't think Veneer internals are too complicated in this case.
Okay.
I mean, I think he's using some existing code editing tool. I don't remember what it was called, but that's what actually provides the left-hand panel there.
Okay.
So I don't think it would be very difficult to do that.
I mean, basically all you're going to be doing is saying reset the content.
Yeah.
It has files and file management stuff that could complicate things.
So I can imagine, like, what's sort of like the simplest UI that would be usable or would do the job. I can imagine on this left-hand pane here that, maybe down here there could be like another pane or something that had a scrubber, or I don't know.
Well, so I would probably delete the capability to load different demos and save files.
All the stuff up here, you mean?
Yeah, that whole top bar.
Yeah.
I'd be like, nope, deleting all that.
Okay.
Because otherwise you have to think about, well, how does this history stuff interact with different files and demos and stuff, right? And you could get a lot of bugs there.
So I guess one question is, would I be using the same version of Veneer as someone in the audience? Or would I have a special version?
If you wanted to be able to push directly from Veneer,
yeah,
have a different version? I don't know. I mean, how bad would it be if you still had to copy and paste into a terminal or something?
It would kind of suck.
Okay.
I mean, I could do it. If I got fast enough, I could do it, but it'd be a little painful. It'd be better if I didn't.
Well, but say you, okay, say it's a little bit simpler. Say you have an app running in your terminal, and that app is just waiting for input on standard in. So you just, copy, paste into the terminal. You don't have to write it to a file or anything and add the file to a Git commit or something. You just paste to the terminal, and then, type the end of file character or whatever, Control-V.
Okay, so I would have like a little simple app that would make it easier for me.
Yeah, that you just have to paste into.
Yeah, I could. I mean, it'd be a little visually distracting because it'd be like constantly selecting code I don't know, maybe there's like a select all or something, but let's see, Command A.
I mean, you could probably set something up where you use the file download API in the browser to download it to the same place and then have a local script looking for changes and then pushing them up.
Oh, so maybe if I click save file or something, it'll
Yeah,
automatically does it?
I mean, it would probably, like, I think it would probably end up bringing up the OS saving dialog, but once you set that up, it should always go to the same place in theory, and so you could probably have a workflow where it's basically click and hit enter.
Let's just see if I try save file, what happens?
Well, Will could run a version of Veneer in a privileged browser that could actually write to the file system or something.
I mean, you could do that, or you could, I don't know. There's a couple different ways you could do it. The most simple way that I can think of is use the file download API. Just download it with a consistent name into the same directory over and over again, and have a script on the local side which is notified on changes and automatically does an upload or a git push or whatever it may be.
Okay. Well, I'm willing to experiment with any of these things. I can tell you that, in my experience, it's often like I'm giving a talk after flying for 20 hours and I'm super jet lagged and I've got like 3 minutes to set up because that's when the last speaker finished, and it has to be something where it's like I can do it and I know it's going to work and I don't have to do like a lot of configuration, and if something goes wrong I can like debug what's going wrong like immediately without like kind of screwing up the talk. Like, I guess that's my concern with like having a bunch of extra tools and scripts running, that I'm going to screw it up somehow or forget to run something, I guess. But so simpler would be better. But some of those things I'm sure could come over time would make it simpler. I guess the ideal thing for me from a usability standpoint would be to have one version of Veneer and to do everything like in Veneer and not have anything extra running. And that would be both check-in and like grabbing stuff. And maybe for the people who are running the version of Veneer who are pulling stuff instead of checking stuff in, like, or whatever you call it, that they've got a button that doesn't do anything or is dimmed out or something. I don't know. If it'd be something, maybe I have to log in or something with Veneer at the beginning of the talk to get some special capability. I don't know. But I'd also.
So, Will, obviously all these things are totally doable. It just adds complexity. So I'm asking what the minimum viable product is. What you can get away without to start with.
What I don't need to start with, things I can get away without having, real-time feedback.
Yeah.
People being able to follow along with the video afterwards, and I guess
So
I want to make it.
Something slightly awkward to push, right?
I would go with the So let me put it this way. I want the experience to be good for the people playing along in the audience in real time. Or that's the main thing I want, and I'm willing to take a little more pain or a little more time to do stuff.
Yeah.
So that's where I'd make the trade-off. I want to make it work for and the other thing is like I would want to make it relatively simple for me to set up and administer, and not having too many moving parts, and not have something where like my talk's in 2 minutes and I have to SSH into some server to try to run a bunch of Unix commands or something, because that's not going to end well, I think. So things that I would take something bulletproof over something more usable on my side, I think. Even if that meant I had to do like another keystroke or two type thing. So, but all those things I think could be experimented with also, right? So it's like, I guess part of the idea is to get to something that's working well enough where I can practice it a few times, like practice giving talks a few times with it, so I can get good enough where I could actually try it for real, and see how it goes. And if it goes well, then have a better idea of what, or well, if it doesn't go well, I guess the other question is like, well, what if the internet just like doesn't work? Well, then I guess I give a regular talk.
Yeah.
I guess that's not so bad. So I would want Veneer or whatever tool I'm using to be usable enough that it wouldn't be ridiculous for me to give a regular talk. Worst comes to worst, I can always fall back to Emacs, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so something where, I mean, could it be as simple as a little script that I run that, like Daniel was saying, like if I could save the same file over and over again, I run like a little script in the terminal and it copies that file to like a Dropbox location or something like that, and the client-side version of Veneer knows to like go get files there, and maybe it gets renamed or something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So something like that sounds like a pretty simple model, and it'd be good enough to play around with, I think. I actually, yeah. So people can, well, Dropbox I guess isn't always super reliable. So maybe something better than Dropbox, but so something like that. Okay.
Well, so do you have a server that you can just like copy files up to with SCP or something?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. That would be a very simple way to do it.
Yeah. So, I got the Mini Cannon website, I've got my website, all that stuff. And, I SSH and SFTP into them all the time. So I can do that.
So I would just imagine you'd have a script that would SCP the file up to your website.
Yeah. Okay. And then client side just needs something where they down. So how would it work on the client side?
I would probably keep an index file that has all the versions in it, have that be periodically pulled by the client, and then whenever a new version appears, they get an updated index, which also has the latest versions pointed to.
Okay. So they could pull that once.
Yeah,
every
so the
10
overall
seconds.
files on the server are going to be, each version of the file and a file listing all the versions. And every second or two, they pull the file listing the versions, and if there's a new one, they pull that file down.
I see. And then the slider would dynamically change then based on how many things are in the index file, so that how many different stops you have, or I'm on version 12 now, or whatever. Or okay, okay. I could see that working. So that sounds like that's not insurmountable to do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the other thing is, I guess, ask David Kahn what he thinks or recommends, suggests. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about. So that's a little.
So one question while we're at this is the license on Veneer is unclear, so it would be good to clarify that.
Okay.
Before we steal it.
Is there no license on the repo?
Correct.
Yep. I asked David about that. Yeah, so that's kind of. I have way bigger plans longer term, but this is something I want to. I figured it's better to actually start experimenting with this stuff than it is to just guess like how it might work, and it's also fun, essentially. So I'd like to start giving talks like this on a regular basis. Maybe not every talk, but like to develop technology good enough where I can start playing around with it. Yeah.
Yeah, the code for Veneer doesn't look like it hasn't had the chance to bloat yet, so I don't think
Good.
it should,
Well, we can float it.
yeah, I don't think it should be too hard to hack on.
Wait till we're done with
Yeah.
it. Let's try not to copy any of my like private keys into the source code. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool. All right. Anything you all have or want to talk about, or prototype, or paper prototype, or talk about design for, or anything? Tools you want to have?
Oh, well, I should ask Daniel if he's made any progress on Crew, because he promised to last week.
I got sick, so I didn't.
You got sick? That's no excuse. So did I. I got sick too. All right.
I slept this weekend, so I didn't work on it.
That's not allowed.
They slept the whole weekend away, too.
Yeah. I was on a flight to Salt Lake, and there's this guys from like Alabama or something. They kept yelling about snakes on the plane. It was hard to see.
I did find a project similar to TTYREC called TTYREC 2, which also seems to support capturing the input characters. So I just linked that into the chat. So something like that might eventually be a good building block for capturing sessions on a process capturing type model.
Cool. Sounds good.
Can you explain what TTYREC is?
Sure. So it's a program which lets you capture the output of your terminal. So you can actually just capture and replay like a session on a Unix shell.
Okay, so that's not going to work, I guess, for external resources. Is that right? Like that would capture the things you're typing in to like a REPL or something, but it's not gonna capture like if you load a file, the contents of the file. Is that right?
Correct. So okay. my intent would be to use sort of heavyweight checkpointing of the looking like a whole Linux container right now, so an LXC. So that would capture file state, and that can be done reasonably inexpensively with the suitable file systems and the tools that come with the LXC containers and with Creo. And then I think that TTYREC could then be used to sort of fill the gaps in between. So you might do a heavyweight checkpoint like once a minute and then capture input on basically on the keystroke level and allow someone to do finer grain scrubbing by taking the closest checkpoint and then sort of playing forward from a TTY recording. This would also then allow you to potentially, if you have a web interface or something like that, someone could quickly play through the terminal contents if they don't particularly care about picking up and playing with it.
Okay.
So you get a lightweight recording playback process, and then if someone wants to jump to a particular point in time, and then you can invoke the more heavyweight processes around that.
I find it interesting that people will record roguelike games using it, and then you can play it back. I guess if you have a deterministic roguelike, then, or at least if you have if you capture the random number seed or something like that, then this would be kind of similar to real-time strategy games, which are generally deterministic, and where the replay is actually just all the inputs from the keys and from the keyboard and the mouse, and it just gets replayed.
Yeah, so ordinarily TTY-REC is just output, so you can play it basically like a video file. It's just much smaller since it's just text, terminal text. But if you connect to like nethack.alt.org, you can actually see in progress games, and they use infrastructure that's built around this stuff.
Oh, wow. So like is that live right now? I can go.
I might be able to. So if you would have to connect over Telnet.
Okay.
Actually, they might have a web client too. I haven't logged in there in a very long time. nethack.alt.org, alt.org. I can provide a link in the chat.
Right there?
Yes.
You can play in the browser. Wow.
So I might be able to screen share and show what the TTY
Okay.
rec stuff looks like. 1 second.
Yeah. Cool. So what exactly are we seeing? Are we seeing someone who's currently playing? So is this a replay or is this live? David Kahn, we've been talking about you all night. Been talking about Veneer the entire night. Right now, Daniel's showing us some sort of NetHack like capture mechanism using TTY share, something like that. TTY rec 2.
I don't know if I've been muted this entire time.
You have been.
Oh, I was just trying to explain what it was. Oops. Where is it? So basically, yeah, this is a live. The way it works is it uses TTY rec underneath, and it takes like a file for like 5 seconds or something like that, and then it replays that file to anyone who's connected to it and interested in watching it.
Cool. And then does it end up being saved at the end, and you can just like replay the whole game?
Right. So you can go onto the nethack.org website, and you can like look up an account, and you'll be able to see full TTY recordings of all their games.
Okay. So that's why it looks kind of laggy. Is it someone recording every few seconds?
I mean, it's recording constantly, but it's there's like a few second delay on it, so it's not exactly real time.
Okay.
But this is actually.
So if you played not in real time, if you're watching it not in real time, but you played the entire game back, would you get every keystroke?
So not with ordinary TTY rec. That's the reason there's TTY rec 2.
Okay.
So TTY rec 2 also includes the keystrokes that are entered, which TTY rec 1 does not. That's the big difference.
Okay. That's pretty cool. What if there's one for Angband? I always like the Angband. Well, thank you for that demo. All right, well, we got David Kahn here. David is creator of Veneer. Got a few questions and possible requests, David. So one question is, what's the license for Veneer? Michael says there's not a license file in the GitHub repo. Okay, you'll put up MIT. Okay, cool. Yeah, all the mini camera stuff's under MIT that I've worked on. Okay, so another thing is we just talking about. So I gave a talk at CodeMesh in London a couple days ago, and I used Veneer. I tried to make the talk interactive, so I used Veneer and GitHub. to try to allow people to play along at home, like, I mean, in the audience. And it worked to the extent that people were able to run code that I checked in and so forth, but it was pretty awkward for a couple reasons. And so one was kind of a UI reason. One was kind of UI perspective. And I will do a screen sharing here to show you. I think this is it. Yeah. So from a UI standpoint, let me do a refresh. I ended up having to bump up the font size because there was a projector that wasn't very good. And so when I bumped up the font size, the only way I knew how to do it was in Firefox with like Command plus or whatever, or Command equal. And so there are a couple things, like the run button kind of became gigantic. And it was like kind of in the code, the way of the code, so I just had to push the code down there. And then the other thing was the code was kind of running off the screen horizontally. So what I did is I made the window really, really wide, so only part of it fit on my computer screen, but at least the code in the left-hand pane was visible then. So those are kind of UI things that I know. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is because I'm using Firefox or what, but I don't seem to be able to get the save file to work. Let's see if I refresh. Okay, and I create a file that works. Okay, and say unify 5 and 5. And if I save the file, it doesn't seem to do anything. Yeah, so I don't know what's going on there. Maybe it's a browser-related thing, or maybe I don't know what's going on. So let's see. So David says, yeah, the save file is still crap. Sometimes it's weird. I should be able to fix all those, no problem. You have to make a file first, I think. Create file. Yeah, so I think I had created a file. Is create file supposed to give me like some sort of dialog box or something? Let's say I refreshed. Click create file. Okay. Equals 6. Okay. And I'll run it, I guess. And a save file. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong. Maybe it's a browser thing. I don't know. All right, thank you. So the Veneer stuff worked well. I guess the other thing, and I was able to work around this. The other thing is that one of the nice things about Veneer is that the interface is more Prolog-y, and I don't have to declare the variables explicitly in a query, and I don't have to wrap things in a run. And I guess that's kind of what the run button is for. The only thing I guess is if I'm using code from an existing, mini-Cameron query, I have to kind of like undo the run. But honestly, I don't think that's like a big deal. So that's not such a big deal. But the main thing we were talking about, beyond these little UI things, which are not, oh yeah, so I guess the other thing is like maybe being able to hide one of these panes or use a splitter like that can be dragged to give more space, or be able to do it horizontal instead of vertical split. Those sorts of things. I don't know what would be easiest. But it'd be nice to be able to have like, the main window be all for the code when giving like when hooked up to a projector, that kind of thing, where I had to bump up the font. But I was able to get around it by just making the window big. So now I know that trick is like not quite as critical. But the other thing we were talking about is, you can't wrap a thing in a run yet. That's right. So I guess the ideal thing would be is if you optionally could wrap things in a run and it still worked. I guess that would be my request. But I can work around that for sure. The other thing we were talking about is that the process I was using is I would type in some code, and then I had a GitHub repo that So I would type in some code, and then I'd copy it, and I'd paste it in the Emacs, and I would save the file, and then in a terminal window, I would check that code into a GitHub repo, and then I would ask people to do a git pull on their end, and then paste that code on their end. Well, they would have to open up that code in some text editor, and then paste that code into Veneer and click the run button. And we got it to work, and people were able to like follow along, which was cool. And so it was more interactive than usual, but it was very slow and kind of awkward. So what we talked about is like, well, how could we make that much more smoothly? And one approach would be to go with something like a kind of a, we call it like a IPython notebook or Jupyter notebook type approach. But we also talked about how that's not really what I want. Like I want all the code to be together at once at any given point. So what I was thinking about is having some sort of interface, like, I don't know, maybe a slider or something here that would allow someone following along in the audience to be able to move the slider across and replace the contents in the editor window with whatever text I had kind of pushed up. And not necessarily to GitHub. We talked about some of the issues with GitHub. So something really lightweight, like it might even be I want on my end to push up a file to like a Dropbox folder or something like that, and then the people in the audience would have like maybe a version of Veneer that would know to go to this directory and like would check every few seconds to see if there are new files there, or if there's new index files or something, and then the slider would change a little bit to reflect how many different versions of code, and they could slide up and down to the different commits or whatever different check-ins metaphorically, and then run different versions of the code so that they can play around with it. So something along with that, that's not like kind of the ideal tool in the end, but that'd be a lot easier and faster to deal with. And then on my side, I could even do something like use the save file button maybe, and then even if I had to do like SCP or run a script on my side to like upload it to a server or to Dropbox, then that probably wouldn't be so bad. But I just want to make sure it's easy for the people who are using it in the audience, make it as easy and as fast for them as possible. So you have like a timeline of changes you're pushing. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea. Now, whether or not people are, so I guess there are two ways to look at it. One way is you could always keep it in sync as much as possible. Basically every time I type a keystroke or something, I guess it could like upload it to some server. But I'm afraid it's going to be kind of jarring, and that people might want to go back and forth and look at different versions of the code or compare things or whatever. And so I don't want to kind of pull the rug under them when I make a change. Like if they're experimenting and trying different queries or trying to see what happens if you change the code to one of the versions I've already put up, I don't want that to like mess things up for them. So just trying to think what would be useful from their standpoint. So it'd be kind of like a timeline that they could have like a scrubber or something like that where they could go back and forth. And what I was doing for that talk in London is I was just verbally saying kind of which version each thing was. But I guess you could also have like a timestamp on it also.
Depending on how sophisticated the API for, like before I thought about using like a paste bin as a backend, so you could just save straight to a paste bin from the editor. But depending on how complex the API for GIS are, I might be able to just use that as a backend, and it might be able to make pushing revisions of it easy, and so people can just have like a gist URL they put in the editor, and then it'll constantly update looking for changes that you make.
Cool. So
and they can fork off of that and push their own changes and stuff, and it might all just fit nicely within the Git/gist system.
So I would just tell them at the beginning of the talk, put in this URL pointing to this gist or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I can just from JavaScript have the editor just save straight to a gist on both ends, not needing to save files and run anything.
So we talked a little bit about GitHub and kind of by proxy gists and the idea of doing something like that. I think the issues we came up with would be, the cross-origin request policy being potentially problematic unless you're using a GitHub API, but I think that's kind of rate limited by number of requests per. Sorry, I'm sick. Rate limited by number of requests per IP when you're not logged in, and I think that was like 60 per hour. So if you're imagining Will's trying to give a talk at a conference with a lot of people, probably behind one IP address potentially, you might run into that API limit for people trying to pull down a copy pretty quick.
Is that true for GIST also? I thought visiting GIST was like just visiting a web page and didn't require. Or is this because it'd be through the API instead of like screen scraping it?
Yeah, so I think the screen scraping it idea would probably hit the cross-origin request problem.
Daniel says visiting the page would run into CORS issues. That's the
you're right. That would be a problem.
These are things that I didn't even know existed. Okay. I'm glad everyone knows about these problems that I would have just run into if I had tried to do it on my own. Okay, so sort of technology aside, that's kind of the vision is that okay, so in the ideal world, you'd have some tool that would be it'd be like Veneer or some modification Veneer, and it would have a couple features. So we had talked about some of the UI changes that make it a little easier when doing a presentation. You'd have some way, ideally in Veneer, but I'd be I'm willing to do something more heavyweight on my end if it makes the users of Veneer in the talk have a better experience. But some way where I could save certain versions, like at certain points, and then upload that to a gist or a file or whatever it is, right? And then kind of give names or numbers, maybe automatically numbered and timestamped, versioned and timestamped, and then some way for the people who are watching the talk or whatever to be able to recognize that there's something new, and then to be able to grab that or to scrub back and forth and look at different versions, and then for a particular version to be able to run queries against it, for a particular version of code, run queries against it, modify the code just like they normally would, and be able to click run, that kind of thing. And then kind of longer term, other cool features would be for someone who's doing that in the audience, if they actually came up with something cool, like they modified the code somehow, they came up with a particularly interesting query, they came up with some query that they can't get to work right or whatever, that they would be able to kind of do it in the other direction, that they would be able to have something for me to look at and for me to be able to run in either another editor window for Veneer or whatever, or maybe an existing editor window. And then that would make it even more interactive, because then I could immediately see what their problem is or the question, or see what their cool example is. So, but that one might be that's a really nice to have, but that's I think would have to build on top of like getting this other stuff to work. So we were just talking about different ways to try that might be possible to build that technology, given that there are these issues with cross-origin stuff, and we looked at some JavaScript libraries. So Daniel pointed out this JS GitHub and JS Git libraries for doing GitHub and Git integration in JavaScript. The JS Git library looked cool, but it seemed to involve, because of this CORS issue and stuff like that, it seemed like we'd have to have a special server running. The JS GitHub stuff looked maybe even closer to what we'd want, but had this issue of basically the access tokens and all that. And then I guess then we're talking about, well, we probably don't even need all of the GitHub stuff. Maybe we could just have something like a Dropbox folder or GIS or whatever, like you said. So, so something simple is fine. And we don't actually need merging capabilities and all the versioning and forking and all the stuff that you get with Git.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like, if it was something like you prepared a talk and you had like a bunch of slides of the steps of the code, that would be really easy and that wouldn't have to deal with the cores. But
yeah,
it's hard to
I'm thinking something really
live.
dynamic where it's like,
Yeah.
who knows what.
So I think one model that we set upon as something that might work, David, is to basically host a copy of Veneer plus some files containing each kind of revision of the code and an index of each of the revisions, say on Will's personal server, somewhere that he can easily push to. And Veneer would just know, it'd be on the same kind of domain, so you wouldn't have the cross-origin issues. And it could kind of just pull the index to see if there were new revisions.
Yeah, I mean that would work, but it's it's still him having his own server. So but as far as that, it would work perfectly well.
Yeah, and I guess part of it is I'm also willing, more than willing to work with the tool that's like a little awkward, so I can start experimenting with like kind of this approach to giving talks, right? Because that's the other part, right? There's one is like the tool itself, and then there's kind of this art of like how do you learn to use this tool in an effective way? How do you teach the audience how to learn the tool, to use the tool, all that stuff, right? So it's not hard to imagine a workflow that'd be a lot more smooth than what I did at CodeMesh. So, maybe it's, I guess, I'm not sure when my next talk is. Actually, I think my next talk is the end of the month. I mean, maybe have something before then, but I'm definitely giving a mini Canrony thing towards the end of the month. So that might be cool to play with it. But I don't really have any sense of how much or how big a change it would be or how much work it would be to get like a very simple version of this running. So something where I run my own server and have like a script or SCP or something to push up versions.
The editor changes would be easy. I could probably do those in a day. As far as the saving and looking for updates, I'm not sure yet. I haven't figured out how I want to do it.
Sorry, the saving and looking for updates.
Yeah, like having like a timeline, any sort of timeline.
Oh, I see. So the like the scrubber type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I just had like a public directory on a web server that I controlled, where people could type in the URL at the beginning of the talk on their Veneer, and had a script that would like.
Yeah, I think if you're granting that, I think it would be pretty easy to do almost any of the stuff.
Yeah. So I guess something like that where it's like a little more work on my side, but it's I could still I can run a script by just command tabbing to the terminal and then like doing an up arrow basically and hitting return, so that's real fast. That only takes a second or something like that. So that that's probably a totally reasonable thing. I guess that was based on the idea of like having the save file, basically just overwrite the old version of that file, and then being able to have a script like copy the contents of that file up to the website. I don't know where the files get saved, Like if with the save file button, is that saved to some browser local location?
Yeah, I'd say it's just some browser. It's local storage. Yeah, it's just local to your browser. So
Okay, is that like some well-known location that I could?
no, I don't think so. I don't think you can get to it at all.
Ooh,
But I don't know.
so maybe that wouldn't work so well.
But I mean,
Daniel
if you're willing to run a server yourself, then the cross origin request thing just goes away because you can just have a server that sets the flag that allows cross origin requests in the web server that you're serving Veneer from.
Oh, okay. Sorry, can you repeat that?
So like if you're granting that you're having a server that you can
Yeah.
host from, you can set a flag in the web server that's hosting Veneer, and you can get rid of the cross origin request issue. And so then you can just use GitHub or whatever pastebin API that you want to use as a backend.
Okay, so say we did that. Say I set up, before a talk. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit also. If we talk, Daniel says
Are you
CORS
sure?
is resource in, not client application in. So Daniel, if like I have everything under my domain, including like Veneer or something, is that?
Well, if everything's under your
files?
domain, then it isn't cross-origin.
Okay, so I could host, I guess. Well, okay.
So Daniel is contesting what David asserted, that if you could host Veneer in such a way that you could pull resources from GitHub without having CORS issues.
That is not true. You cannot do that.
Okay, you're right.
What's up with this CORS thing? When did this happen? Is this like recent? I did web development a long time ago. I don't remember about having CORS issues, but I guess we normally controlled all our own servers and everything, and we're only doing one website, so.
I mean, fundamentally, if you put everything in the same place, then again, there's no cross-origin, so you can use XHR requests totally normally. There are other ways that were sort of pre-CORS that you could work around it that I mentioned earlier, like JSON-P, but all of them sort of require at least some cooperation with the endpoint that you're trying to communicate with. So you might be able to do JSON-P trickery with GitHub.
So the problem is not with me hosting Veneer. Okay, so I see. So if I hosted Veneer and I also had the files that we're writing to and reading from on my own server and everything's under my domain, that's fine. But as soon as we start going to GitHub or things like that, then it's CORS.
Correct. Yes, because
okay.
at that point, the web browser is simply not going to let you do the XHR request. It's going to say that the origin is not permitted. It'll actually give you a specific error saying you're not allowed to do this.
Okay.
And the way to override that is if the resource side sets a particular HTTP response header which says, yes, you can do these cross-origin requests from these particular domains with these particular parameters.
So is there anything like gists that I could host also on my? I mean, does GitHub make that stuff available? Can I set up a server for gists, or is that like purely a GitHub thing?
I mean, I think GitLab, which you can host yourself, has some gist comparable functionality.
Okay.
But
I guess I also don't like necessarily need all that stuff, right? I mean, I guess
Yeah, you don't.
we don't need all the revision control stuff, so.
yeah, I mean, so that's sort of the point. If you need Git, you can probably work around it by hosting your own version of GitLab, which has, it's not total feature parity with GitHub, but it's pretty close. But it's a lot of complexity that you don't necessarily need. And if you're going to be running something, you can spin something up that's quite a bit simpler.
Okay, so what if I just wanted to do something like I have a public web directory that's on my server, right? Would I still need to have my own custom hosted version of Veneer for Veneer to even grab files from that server?
You would either need to host your own copy of Veneer or modify your server to serve CORS in a way that Veneer would be able to read from it.
Okay. And that's modifying the headers or whatever.
Yeah, so it's a server configuration option. You can probably find instructions for whatever HTTP server you're using.
And then would Veneer then need to be modified so it looks for that CORS header information, or is that like something that the browser does?
No, so the browser will do it. It's just that you would have to do cross-site HTTP requests to actually fetch things, and you'd need to come up with some sort of a protocol to actually coordinate what you're downloading from your server.
So what would it mean for me to host my own version of Veneer? So Veneer is like JavaScript and HTML, I guess. So
yeah, it's just putting it on your server. That's it.
Okay. So that doesn't sound hard. I guess if my server goes down, it sucks. But if my server goes down, it's not going to work anyway. So it doesn't matter. Okay, so I could have Veneer hosted under my domain and have these files in my some directory on the domain. Okay. And I could even, I guess, hand modify that version of Veneer to point to the directory address before a talk if I wanted to, or something like that. Or have a version of Veneer associated with that each directory. If I didn't want the users to even have to type in a URL or something.
Yeah, you could, or you could also set up a request parameter that you read from the JavaScript to find the appropriate data directory to read from. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that you could do it. So.
Okay. Just trying to think of how it can make it easiest for someone using it. Okay, and then I would just do things normally, and then I would upload to my directory, and yeah. So, and if the save file button doesn't, okay, so save. Let's see. So if I'm hosting, would I then have my own special version of Veneer also hosted on my site? Whose job is that when I click save file, it's going to upload a new version of, or the current version of everything up to the special directory?
That could be done.
Okay. So I guess that'd be one way to do it. I don't know if that's the simplest way to do it, but I mean in terms of making changes to Veneer or other things, but that's something I could set up before a talk, I think.
How would you have Veneer do the uploading?
XHR post.
Okay, so
like you said, there's a lot of different ways we could do this. It's just finding out the nicest one is what I'd have to do.
What's an XHR post? Is that?
So it's just a XML HTTP request. So it's an automated browser-generated web request. I mean, it's the same thing you would do for a read. It's just you can have a different method for uploading a file or making a change.
So for my server, normally I have to have like SSH access and all that. How would this have permission to push up?
You have to be running a piece of software on the server that would know how to respond.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not very complex. It would really just have to be able to manage a authenticated file upload.
Okay, and how would the authentication work? It would
Username, password.
Okay. All right, and I guess, like you all said, there are many other ways to do it. So, this may or may not be the best solution. Okay. Well, so something along those lines in terms of the utility would be really cool. I would definitely be happy to use such a tool. Be very glad to use such a tool and start playing around with giving talks and tutorials that way. See how that would change interactivity with the audience. So David, several of the folks who played along, or not the people who played along, but several people in the audience said that they liked the talk I gave at CodeMesh, and they thought that it at least got the audience who was participating with the browser like more involved, and they saw people playing around with it and experimenting. So even with that pretty awkward mechanism, it was somewhat successful. So I think that would be a cool thing to keep pushing. Were you going to say something, David? I saw your mute was off a minute ago. Well, I think Veneer is awesome. I think the any polishing would be just even that, make it that much nicer. But when I was thinking about how I could possibly make things more interactive with the tools I had, it's like, oh yeah, Veneer is like obviously the one thing I have that I could get running right away, and people could experiment. And I guess the other cool thing about Veneer is that after a talk or tutorial or whatever, people can just go to the regular Veneer website and use it normally, right? And it has a bunch of example programs in it, and I was using some of those. So that's cool. It's like they don't have to install any software. They don't have to know anything about that stuff. They could just have to go to the web browser. So anyway, that was what we were talking about largely. And then when you joined, we were looking at the TTY Rec 2 stuff that Daniel was talking about. I guess Daniel and Michael, you all did some hacking last time, or?
No, not really.
No, okay. So mostly just kind of talking about things like that. So the TTY Rec 2, Daniel. So where does that fit into things? Like what would you use that for?
So I was supposed to do some hacking over the weekend that I didn't, but I'm trying to put together the process checkpoint restore, things that we were talking about in the earlier Hangouts. And so this in combination with like some tmux functionality for allowing broadcasting a terminal session, and then allowing a person who's watching to pull a copy of that session and basically interact with it with their own way. So this would sort of serve as an intermediate, TTY could serve as an intermediate where you could do heavyweight checkpointing on some sort of periodic basis, like once a minute, and then use a TTY recording of both the input and the output to sort of fill in the details for more granular time travel.
All right, cool. So is the TTY Rec to, that seem well? I guess what's the next step? Like, where do you go from here?
I'm still trying to get the checkpoint and restore stuff working. That's what I was hoping to hack on over the weekend and show off today, but I didn't have time to. So
how dare you get sick?
Maybe next week I can show that off.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all sick, David. Hope you're not sick. Okay, very cool. Well, Michael, you've been sick, so I guess I'm not sure we're getting a status update for you. David, have you been up to anything interesting? Not really at the moment. Okay. I mentioned to Michael and to Daniel that I had a good visit in England and talked to several folks about online collaboration and learning tools, and had some really good discussions. And so maybe at some point some of those folks would be willing to come on and talk about some of their ideas. Working on a bit on a new scheme implementation. Very cool. So is that sort of like the Veneer stuff, but for all of Scheme? No, just a normal scheme. Okay, so this is not web-based. This is like all traditional. Okay. Is this an R7 scheme or R6, R5? Nothing serious. Okay, so just like a little little scheme, core scheme. Yeah. Yeah, supporting big scheme is a lot of work. Yes, always room for new scheme implementation in my book. Is there anything special about the scheme implementation? Like any ideas you're trying to try out? Want to play with staging? Oh, very cool. Yeah, I want to check that out. Scala people have been doing interesting stuff with staging recently. Okay. Well, anything else anyone wants to talk about? I mean, I could go on at length about some of the other things I've been talking to people about. I'll just mention one thing. That was when I was talking to Andrea, my friend Andrea. She mentioned, or we were just talking about, kind of issues of anonymity and how if we want to have a tool where you can have two-way communication between, say, someone giving a talk and someone in the audience, or online collaboration tools in general that that allowing people to be anonymous. We both think this is like an important thing to allow people to keep their anonymity, and so that wasn't really something I thought about beforehand, but once we started talking about, I think that's important for many reasons. Not everyone wants to have their identity known. Not people interact differently. People want, I don't want to judge two questions or comments differently because one person is famous and one person isn't. I want people to feel like they can ask a question, not be judged, all that stuff. So, there are lots of reasons people want to be anonymous. So, hadn't really thought about that as a design criteria, but that's something that like for that to be able to happen. Want to make sure that we build that potential into any tools and think about how use cases from the perspective of someone who wants to remain anonymous.
What strength of anonymity are you talking about? Are you talking about just like casual anonymity, or do you want anonymity that can resist attempts to uncover someone?
Ideally, the latter.
The latter's hard. The former's easy.
Yeah. The latter would be better, I think. To begin with, we certainly would want to support the former, and to make it very clear, like, where our enforcement of anonymity ends, right? Like, what we think the guarantees are or whatever, and ideally, would want to make it stronger. But yeah, of course, anonymity is hard, and of course, if you have a room with like, I don't know. I think maybe it's less critical for a room full of people who are an audience for a talk, right? Maybe there's more casual anonymity, like someone doesn't want to be embarrassed, whatever. But you're probably not going to have like, a dedicated attacker or something. But when people are collaborating on the internet over long term, for projects, maybe for months or years, then I think stronger protection and anonymity is important. And there have been unfortunate cases where people in their communities have been unanonymized where they didn't want to be, and so I don't know. I don't know enough about the sort of technical and security issues and all that related, but that's something I'd like to keep in mind for the design.
I mean, if you So, I mean, if you build a web service, fundamentally you could expose a Tor hidden service access point that would enable people to connect to it without you really knowing who they are, where they're coming from.
Sure. So something like that, right? Where we're not going to. The purpose of the tool it's not an anonymity tool, but it's something that could work with some other service. And of course, like Tor isn't perfect, is my understanding, but if we something where we can help protect people's anonymity if they want, without a boiling the ocean approach where we're like rebuilding the web or something. So something where they could plug into some existing service like Tor.
Yeah, so I mean, Tor hidden services are pretty straightforward from the implementation standpoint. If you can host a web server, you just load the Tor software in parallel, and you can expose that service over Tor securely as a hidden service.
Okay.
And then you just give them the onion address, and it's actually one of the more safer modes of using Tor because it doesn't go out through exit nodes that might be manipulating the traffic.
Okay, so that sounds like a very interesting idea. Yeah, that would be really cool. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about how important that was, but once I started thinking about like the actual interactions I have with people online, there are people who want to remain anonymous, and I want to respect that. Yeah. So anyway, that's just one thought I had that I hadn't really thought of before, but had lots of good conversations with people. So, but probably too much to talk about tonight, so maybe we'll save that for another time. Yeah, okay. Any other closing thoughts? David says he thinks anonymity is important as well. So. Yeah, so let's see. I think for next week, is everyone going to be, let's see, I'm going to be at ClojureCon next week in Philadelphia. So I don't know if I'll be able to do a hangout or not. We'll see. Maybe. Depends on hotel internet, probably. Might be able to, unless there's like a party that night or something to see people. Yeah, well, I thought this was, from my perspective, this was a really useful session. So thank you. Thanks, everyone. And I suspect by maybe next week the video will be up from CodeMesh, and you can see my awkward attempt at trying to do this. Maybe you'll feel sorry for me when I see what it's like when I had tools that aren't quite ready. But I figured it was important to just go for it, and we'll figure out how to make the tools better. But I think it's really cool. Like I think if we can get to the point where the tools are actually reasonable to use for both the audience and the speaker, that we could get more people trying this and learn from them, and just keep improving tools and try to create sort of a new class of talk that's more interactive than usual. I think that'd be really exciting. All right, Michael, you have anything else to say? Any other thoughts?
Nope.
Hope you feel better. Hope you feel better, Daniel. And thanks for joining us, David. And thanks for all your Veneer work. It was really cool. I wouldn't have been able to attempt it without Veneer. So I was very happy to make a first effort there. All right. Well, hopefully we'll see everyone next week. And nothing else. I'll see if I can at least stop by and hang out. But we'll see. I should know closer to the hangout date. All right, I will stop the broadcast if anyone wants to hang out and talk for a few minutes. Happy to do so.